to show you what I think is the best way to approach chromaticism in your solos. It's actually a very simple concept when you break it down. It just takes some practice like anything else. So here's the thing about playing chromatically, is that it can sound very random if you don't do it right, but if you do it right, it can sound really tasty. And everyone's going to think you're really cool, and that's the whole reason we chose this instrument in the first place. So when you play chromatically, you're going to want to think ahead as much as you can. The whole purpose of chromaticism is to embellish or create tension around a certain note. And in order to do that, you're actually prolonging the time it takes to get to that note. So we have to think ahead a little bit. If you're not looking ahead and you're just playing a bunch of random chromatic notes with no end in sight, it's going to sound like you don't really know what you're doing. And you may look like a poser. Because everyone knows that certain notes just sound better over certain chords. Okay? I said it. So in my opinion, the best way to start utilizing chromaticism is by surrounding your chord tones. You can also think of this as your arpeggio, right? So we're going to use chromatic notes to surround those chord tones. Another word for this is enclosures. So we're enclosing a note, essentially. So let's say I did this over a C chord. So the first step would be finding my chord tones in C. So that looks like this. So I just played a C major arpeggio, right? So now I'm going to surround each of those notes that I just played with some chromatic notes. So let's do like 2 half steps underneath the note and 2 half steps above the note. So just on that first note, here's 2 notes below, 2 notes above, and then landing on C. And these are all just half steps. Like if I play these in order, they're all right next to each other, right? So my next note would be E here. So to enclose that, I'm going to go. G is my next note. And then we're back to C. Then you can come down to if you want. Let's try this one here. So if my target note is here, I'm going to go 1 chromatic note below my target note, and then 2 chromatic notes above my target note, and then land. Another thing you can do is repeat notes. So now I'm going to repeat this note. So I'm going to come back to my starting note before I land on my target note, and that sounds like this. So you can see how that's sort of enclosing this note right here. It's like getting closer and closer, and it finally lands on the note. So you can do this with minor chords too. So if I did C minor, if you're struggling with this a little and want a simpler way to start, I would just start by picking a note that you know sounds good over a chord and then experimenting with chromaticism around that note. So let's say back to C major. Let's say I know this note sounds good. Alright, my third, or an E. Maybe I'll just start by taking 1 chromatic note from each side. You can add in some other notes from the arpeggio or the scale. So now let's do 2 chromatic notes below, 2 above. That one may sound a little weird to you, and that's because this is a sharp 4, which is actually not included in the C major scale. So some of these you may like, some of these you may not like. We can always alter them. So instead of doing this, maybe I'll go all the way from the 5th, because I know that note is in the scale. So now we can create some exercises or licks that use enclosures in combination with other notes from your scale or arpeggio. So here's an example of that. So C major again. So what that is I'm doing, that's my enclosure, right? 1 chromatic note below, 2 above, back to that one below, and then landing on my chord tone. Then what I'm going to do is take notes from the scale, 1, 2, 3, and 5. So C, D, E, and G. And that's my whole pattern. And I can just repeat that. And, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117, 118, 119, 120, So that's just my C arpeggio, starting on the 5th. And then there's my enclosure. So 2 notes below, 2 notes above, and then landing back on a chord tone. And this note is the start of the next rotation of that pattern. All right, let's try this tough one here. So the thought process behind that one is I'm enclosing my 5th, or my G. I'm going to walk up the scale and enclose my C. And then I'm going to walk up the scale again. And here I'm going to enclose the 3rd, or the E, with just 2 notes. And then I'm going to walk up the scale until I land back on my starting note, which was an F sharp, which was the first note of that enclosure to enclose the G. So really I'm still just thinking of my triad, but there's a lot more going on. So enclosing the G, walking up, enclosing the C, walking up, enclosing the E, walking up, and then notice how these licks are very centered around the arpeggio or scale tones, and the chromatic notes are really just being used to embellish those. So when you're playing chromatic ideas, I suggest thinking mainly of the overarching idea or the note that you're embellishing or enclosing. So there, even though there were a bunch of chromatic notes outside of the C major scale, really I was just thinking C major the whole time. Another general rule of thumb is that when you're starting out with this, you probably want to avoid landing on chromatic notes outside of the scale on the downbeat. The reason for that is that the downbeat is going to sort of accentuate that note that you're on, and I think it's a little bit better to land on a chord tone on the downbeat when you're starting out, at least, and getting the hang of this. Obviously you can do whatever you want. I would just keep that in mind. Now what we can do is actually take this concept through a chord progression. So instead of just focusing on one chord, let's take it through a 2-5-1. Let's do a 2-5-1 in G major this time. So that chord progression, for those of you who don't know what a 2-5-1 is A minor 7 to D7 to G major 7. So I'll show you a few licks using chromaticism over that chord progression. And for all these licks, I'm just going to do 8/8 notes over the 2, or the A minor 7, 8/8 notes over the 5, or the D7, and just resolve on either a chord tone or a tension like a 9 or something over the G major 7. So 8 notes over A minor 7, 8 notes over D7, and just one resolution note on the G major 7. So everything I just played came from arpeggios and scales that I know work over those different chords. And essentially I was just connecting notes from those scales or arpeggios with chromatic notes. Again, this is something that takes a while to get used to, but I would just start to bring it in slowly into your playing. Me personally, I would start with some basic arpeggios and bring it in there, like the exercises at the beginning of this video. Then you can start bringing it into more and more like altered scales, diminished scales, whatever. You can come up with some really cool licks and ways to tie different things together. They're also very helpful in the transitionary stages between one chord and another chord. So just start slow, mess around with it, and let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Hope you took something away from this. If you liked the video, just give me a like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.